Hello, guys. I am back with another episode. There is a message that I want to share with you guys. It comes from our dear sister who was saying that I got married into a ritualistic family in the 1980s. So she sent another message and she said, like I told you, that my story is quite a long story. After I had written that email, since I didn't have anything much to do, I decided to tell you another story. At that time, after I had ran away from my in-laws and when I had went back to my own family, life was kind of hard for me. You know, like there are days as a woman when you have just divorced from your own husband. A lot of men in your village, and most of them will be married men, they will start chasing after you. So I just thought that it is far much better for me to renegotiate once again with my husband. The reason why I had chosen to renegotiate with my husband, because there was this other day when I had gone to church, then there was this sermon that was speaking about divorce. So I decided in my own heart that if my husband was going to come, I would try to renegotiate with him. And yes, he did, but I was so wrong. I wished that if I had just stayed divorced like that, because after he had spoken with me and he told me that from now on he will follow everything that I would say, I agreed to move back with him. But he said that I had to ask for his mother's forgiveness first before we could move in together. I refused, but he said that I had to do this out of respect for his mother because I was a daughter-in-law. It didn't matter how much my mother-in-law had been so bad towards me, but I had to show her respect that she was the woman who had given birth to the man that she finally married. I ended up being humiliated and kneeling before my mother-in-law. First, when I asked for her forgiveness, she just kept quiet. I ended up kneeling and she humiliated me because she remained quiet. After a couple of minutes, that is when she said, I have forgiven you, daughter-in-law. For a brief period of time, that is how I moved back with my husband. But when I had moved back with my husband, I thought that now he was going to be a man enough and he was going to discuss with me everything that we needed to do in our marriage, but things were still the same. And now that I had moved in back with my husband, I was in a tricky position. I could not walk away just like that. But still, I couldn't understand why my husband was acting towards this. He was cold towards me. And at that time, the unfortunate part about it was because I had fallen pregnant again. He knew that there was no way I could go. Whenever something bad will happen, he would always take sides with his family. And in cases where you could see that this was wrong, I was not here to destroy but to build. I was not in the family for sides, but in the case of our child, he had been mileages, and yet he chose to keep quiet and not even ask a single question. This was very clear to me that all these people were not clean. Then it was in the early 90s, I witnessed my husband's sister die. My mom-in-law gave her something to drink after she had fallen pregnant. Unfortunately, she died at 7 months during her pregnancy. And that is when I realized that I was staying with pure devils. On the morning before the burial, I bumped into my mom-in-law and her sisters washing the deceased, and after washing, they took the water. Then they stored that water in a funny container. That water was used to wash small kids at that homestead. I still remember that container very well. I fought for my child and I stood because I knew that my husband would agree for me to bath my child with the water that was stored in that container. But since I knew the color of that container, whenever my mom-in-law will say that she wanted to bath my son, I would refuse, or most of the times I would go and sit right next to her. Sometimes I'll see that she would try to reach for that container, and it was that same container container that I had seen in the past when they were busy pouring water that they had used after they had washed up the deceased body. When they came to my son, I told them that I was a born-again Christian and I didn't believe in all of this traditional stuff. How could they bath my own son with such dirty water? My mother-in-law was not happy, and she made it her assignment to make sure that she removed me from their homestead. 10 years later, yes, she tried to succeed and I left the marriage again. But today I am going to tell you what I saw in that family by that time that I had tried to make things work out between me and my husband. I am grateful that I left that marriage in one piece, and I want to thank God because He is the one who protected me. The next few weeks were quite horrible. After the death of our auntie, we continued to slave on that homestead because she made it clear that it was the job of her daughter-in-laws to work for her. The next thing that I saw, my husband started praying like no man's business. He was not a very prayerful man, and it shocked me. He would sing songs and kneel facing towards the direction of the sunrise each and every morning and sunset each and every evening. I just looked and was never interested to ask a lot of questions. I continued calling upon the name of the living God and worshiping in truth and in spirit. A few days later, I went to the fields and left him sleeping with our son. This was the tradition. Women used to work in the fields whilst men were resting, and nobody will bother. But if you sleep till 6 a.m., you'll be in trouble. On that day, I knocked off earlier and I rushed back home. As I approached our homestead, I heard my son crying on top of his voice. I had never been panicked like that in my life, so I ran towards the sound of the cry, and the sound was coming from that back room I spoke about when I first wrote to you, where we kept a drum of mealie meal, and underneath the drum, that is when I had seen that snake sliding from underneath that drum, that same snake that many villagers had tried to kill and burn, but it had just disappeared. I knew instantly that something was wrong, and my son continued to cry, escalating his voice. I knew that the Lord had spoken to me, and he had pretended to sleep while he knew that he was on a mission. All these thoughts were in my mind, and this was in the morning. As I approached, I heard a lot of enchantments, and this was like he's calling the dark side. My son maintained the cry, and as I opened the door, I saw the shock of my life. My own husband and his mother were both naked, and their bodies were covered with white ash. My son was held with one leg whilst suspended in the air. My own husband was holding a very long knife, and the whole house was filled with smoke. I grabbed my son and I ran for my life and for my son's life. But on that day, my husband was really angry towards me. That is the first time when my husband started to physically abuse me. When I tried running towards our neighbor's homestead, my husband caught up with me. Then he pinned me to the ground. He started punching me, and he punched me so much that I could not see. My eyes were hurt, but he kept on punching me. He dragged me towards our bedroom, and the way that he was dragging me, he had held one of my legs whilst he was dragging me like that, and on the other hand, he was holding a knife. Then he said, "If you scream again, I am going to stab you with this knife until you have died." At that time, I knew that my fate was sealed, and my man had turned into a violent animal. There was no way I could go, because actually the village headman was my mother's-in-law brother. So they were relatives. Even if I would go there, they would just put all of the blame on me. After my husband had finished beating me up, I cried so much. And the worst part about it, my mother-in-law, she didn't even feel sorry for me. As hurt as I was like that, she came, then she knocked on my bedroom door. Then she said, "It is time for you to prepare something. If you are sleeping in there, who is going to prepare food for us to eat?" I woke up from that bed and I thought that maybe if I should just get rat poison, because in my bedroom there were a lot of rats that were giving me problems. So I said, if I can just take this rat poison, and whilst I am cooking, I'll just pour all of that poison in that pot and everyone in this family will just die and give me peace. But I want to thank God, because after I had taken that poison, whilst I was cooking, before I could do that, I heard that suddenly there was someone who was standing at the door. When I looked at the person who was standing at the kitchen door, it was one of the village priests from the local mission. Then he said that I just heard a voice that told me that I should come here and pray with you. When that priest looked at me and he saw that how damaged my face was, immediately he knew that I was a victim of abuse. But in those days, it was quite normal for a woman to be abused by her husband. After that priest had prayed with me, I never told that priest that it was my intention to pour all of the poison that I had quickly placed into my pockets after I had seen him standing at the kitchen door. After that priest had prayed for me, he then went to the next homestead. He said that God had told him to go around the village praying for people. After I had finished cooking and dishing up for everyone, on that day I remember that I could not eat because my mouth, my face was painful. So all of the smoke was giving me a severe headache. I then decided to go and rest in my bedroom. But as I was resting like that, my husband came. Then he forced to have sexual intercourse with me. As he was busy like that on top of me, I could not complain, I could not refuse. I looked at him and I said, "This is the man who dragged me through the street and he was punching me and he was holding a knife against me. Now, this is the man who is on top of me, enjoying himself." I had to come up with a plan. Dear listeners, right there was a message that I received from our dear sister. Quite a painful story. Please let us talk about this issue in the comment section. I'll be back with the rest of this story.